Don't do this." But the rancher did it anyway. And the whole town was outraged. The sun rose slowly over the small town of Cedar Creek, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The morning air was crisp, filled with the faint smell of hay and earth. Birds chirped lazily as they flitted between the trees lining the main street, and the distant sound of a rooster crowing echoed across the fields. Life in Cedar Creek had always moved at a gentle pace. People knew each other by name, and strangers were rare. The town was the kind of place where everyone looked out for everyone else, and news traveled fast, even faster when it concerned Eli Thompson. Eli was a man who had lived on the edge of town for as long as anyone could remember. His ranch stretched for acres, dotted with grazing cattle, barns, and wide-open fields. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a weathered face that told the story of years spent working under the sun. His eyes were sharp, a deep blue that seemed to see right through a person, and his hands were calloused from hard work. People respected him because he was skilled at what he did and had an unshakable confidence. But he was also known for his stubbornness. Once Eli made up his mind, it was nearly impossible to change it. The town had always been wary of Eli's decisions. He had a reputation for doing things his own way, often ignoring advice or warnings from others. While some admired his independence, others feared the consequences of his choices. Children whispered stories about the rancher's stubbornness, and adults shook their heads, recalling past incidents where Eli had ignored warnings, only to face problems later. But for all his flaws, there was something undeniably magnetic about Eli. People couldn't help but watch what he did, whether they agreed with him or not. On this particular morning, the town was buzzing with anticipation. The annual county fair was only a few days away, and everyone was preparing. Stalls were being set up, banners were hung across the streets, and the smell of fresh-baked pies and roasted corn began to fill the air. It was the highlight of the year, a time when the community came together to celebrate, compete in friendly contests, and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. But amid all the excitement, a cloud of worry loomed over Cedar Creek. Rumors had started spreading about Eli Thompson and a plan he had been keeping to himself. No one knew the full details, but whispers suggested that he intended to make a bold change on his property, something that could impact the town. Some said it involved the river that ran along the edge of his land. Others claimed it had to do with clearing part of the forest to expand the ranch. Whatever it was, the uncertainty made people uneasy. Neighbors would meet at the local diner, the hub of the town, and discuss the rumors in hushed voices. "Have you heard what Eli's planning?" one woman asked, nervously stirring her coffee. "I don't like it," another replied. "It sounds risky." But not everyone agreed. Some admired Eli's confidence, believing he knew best and that whatever he decided would somehow work out. "He's been around longer than most of us," an older man said. "He knows this land better than anyone." Eli, however, seemed entirely unconcerned with what people thought. That morning, he was already out in the fields, inspecting the fences and checking on the cattle. He moved with a quiet authority, walking past the barns and nodding to the workers who had been hired to help him with various tasks. His presence was commanding. Even the horses seemed to sense it, raising their heads as he passed by. He had a plan, one that had been forming in his mind for weeks. He believed it was the right choice, the only way to improve his ranch and secure its future. Despite the whispers and warnings, Eli was calm. He had always trusted his instincts, even when others doubted him. In his mind, experience and common sense mattered more than fear or gossip. He remembered the lessons his father had taught him. Never be afraid to take responsibility. Always think ahead, and trust yourself even when others do not. Those lessons had carried him through tough times. dry seasons, storms, and the occasional disputes over land or livestock. He believed that this new decision, whatever it required, was just another challenge he could overcome. Meanwhile, the townspeople watched from a distance. Children riding their bicycles past the edge of Eli's ranch would pause to peek through the fence, curious about what he was doing. Adults walking to the market would shake their heads, exchanging worried glances. Even the town sheriff had visited Eli a few days ago, asking if he had considered the possible effects of his plan. Eli had simply smiled, tipped his hat, and reassured him that everything would be fine. "Don't worry, Sheriff. I know what I'm doing," he said. The words were polite, but there was an unyielding firmness in his tone that left no room for argument. Inside the town, people began to prepare themselves mentally for whatever Eli was planning. Some tried to organize meetings, hoping to persuade him to reconsider. Flyers appeared urging caution, while others quietly visited his ranch attempting to reason with him in person. But Eli's reputation preceded him. Everyone knew that trying to change his mind was nearly impossible. He listened politely, sometimes nodded, but ultimately, his decisions were his own. At the same time, there was a strange mixture of fascination and fear surrounding him. People couldn't help but admire his courage. Not everyone would have the confidence to make bold moves alone, relying solely on experience and intuition. But there was also anxiety about what might go wrong. A single misstep could cause serious problems, not just for Eli, but for the entire town. The river was a lifeline, providing water for crops and animals. The forests were homes to wildlife. The land had been carefully balanced for generations, and any drastic change could upset that balance. Eli, however, remained entirely focused on his work. That morning he examined the riverbank, testing the soil and inspecting the flow of water. He muttered quietly to himself, jotting down notes in a small leather-bound notebook. The machinery he had rented sat idle nearby, waiting for the moment he deemed it necessary. Every detail mattered to him. The placement of fences, the health of the soil, the strength of the barns. To an outsider, his meticulous attention to detail might have seemed obsessive, but to Eli, it was preparation. Preparation for a decision that he believed was inevitable. By noon, a few of the town's more courageous neighbors had gathered near the edge of the ranch, hoping for a glimpse of what Ellie was up to. They called out to him from a safe distance. "Ellie, are you sure about this?" one asked. "We're worried for everyone." Eli looked up, shaded his eyes from the sun, and gave them a small, reassuring smile. "I appreciate your concern," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But this is something I need to do, trust me." Some shook their heads and walked away, frustrated that they couldn't convince him. Others lingered, watching silently, their curiosity battling with their unease. The ranch, normally a quiet and predictable place, now seemed charged with tension. Every sound, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of leaves, the clatter of tools, felt amplified in the heavy air. It was as if the land itself knew that something significant was about to happen, something that would ripple beyond the boundaries of Eli's property. As the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, the town's unease grew. Conversations in the diner slowed, and people paused their chores to glance toward the ranch. Even those who had once admired Eli's independence now felt a gnawing worry. What could he possibly be planning that warranted such secrecy? The questions lingered, unanswered, creating a mixture of fear and fascination that hung over Cedar Creek like a cloud. Eli, for his part, seemed unaffected by the growing tension. He continued his work, moving with a quiet determination that left no doubt he would see his plan through, whatever it might cost. That night, as the town settled into bed, whispers continued to circulate, and curiosity kept some residents awake. The calm of the morning had transformed into a restless anticipation. Everyone knew that soon they would witness Eli Thompson in action, an event that could change the town forever. And for better or worse, there was no turning back now. The morning after the whispers and restless nights, the town of Cedar Creek woke to an uneasy quiet. The usual sounds of roosters crowing and children laughing felt muted, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Conversations at the diner were quieter than usual. Farmers and shopkeepers exchanged concerned glances over cups of coffee, their voices hushed. The rumor about Eli Thompson's plan had grown louder overnight, and the worry that had started as a whisper was now a tense hum beneath every word. Eli, meanwhile, rose before dawn. The sky was still a deep shade of blue, dotted with the first faint hints of sunlight. He dressed quickly, lacing up his worn boots, and stepped out onto the wooden porch of his house, overlooking the sprawling ranch. The land stretched endlessly before him, green fields interrupted only by barns, fences, and the slow-moving river that wound along the edge of his property. The river, quiet and reflective in the morning light, was the source of both life and concern for the town. Eli took a deep breath of the cool morning air. He could feel the weight of the town's eyes on him, even though no one was physically present. He had always been stubborn, but now he sensed the full force of the community's attention. This wasn't just about his ranch anymore. It was about the balance between his freedom and the town's well-being. Still, he believed that his plan was necessary. He had studied the land for weeks, weighing every risk, and he trusted that the outcome would ultimately be positive. By mid-morning, a few neighbors had gathered near the edge of the ranch, determined to speak with him again. They approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance. Among them were the Johnsons, who owned the farmland next to Eli's property, and Mrs. Prisco. Carter, the town's longtime baker, whose husband had warned her about the possible consequences. The group's expressions were a mixture of anxiety and determination. They knew that today, if ever, they needed to convince Eli to reconsider. "Eli," Mr. Johnson called out, his voice steady but firm. "We need to talk to you. This plan, it could hurt a lot of people. The river, the crops, even the animals. Please, think about it." Eli looked at them calmly, his hands resting on his hips. "I appreciate your concern," he said. His voice was even, but beneath it was the unmistakable firmness of someone who had already made up his mind. "I've thought about this for weeks. I know the risks, and I'm prepared to handle them." Mrs. Carter stepped forward, her hands clutching a basket of freshly baked bread, as if it were armor. "Prepared or not, Ellie," she said softly, "you can't see everything that might happen. The river isn't just part of your ranch. It feeds our homes and our farms. One mistake could ruin everything." Eli's eyes softened slightly, and he gave a small nod. "I understand," he said, "but I've spent my life caring for this land. I've never taken a step without thinking it through. I know what I'm doing, and I promise it will all work out." The neighbors exchanged worried glances. They had expected resistance, but hearing Eli speak so calmly made their concern even more urgent. He wasn't reckless in the way they feared. He was confident. And confidence in someone as stubborn as Eli could be just as dangerous as carelessness. Word of the gathering spread quickly through the town. By late morning, a small crowd had formed along the main road leading to the ranch. People came out of curiosity, concern, and a desire to witness what might become a historic moment for Cedar Creek. Children perched on fences, their eyes wide with fascination. Adults whispered warnings and advice to one another. hoping someone might sway Eli's decision. It was clear that today would be a day unlike any other. As the crowd grew, Eli moved to inspect the river once more. He walked along the bank, testing the soil, observing the current, and making careful notes in his leather-bound notebook. Every movement was deliberate, precise. He knew that any hasty action could be catastrophic, yet beneath his careful demeanor was the simmering tension of a man who felt the weight of responsibility. He wasn't acting out of stubbornness alone. He genuinely believed that this decision was the best way to secure his ranch and protect the future of his land. A group of concerned townspeople approached again, this time joined by the local sheriff, a tall man with a calm but commanding presence. "Eli," the sheriff said, raising his hand in greeting, "we need to discuss the potential impact of your plan. The town is worried, and I think it's important we understand exactly what you intend to do." Eli nodded politely. "I understand your concerns," he said, "but I've studied the land, the river, and the surrounding environment. I've accounted for everything I could see. I promise this plan is safe." The sheriff frowned, sensing the tension building among the neighbors. "Safe or not, Eli, there are consequences we can't predict. Once the river is altered, it's not just your land that's affected. You have to consider the entire community." Eli's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't raise his voice. "I have considered it," he said firmly. "I've thought about this for months. I know the risks, and I've prepared for them. Please, trust me." Despite his words, doubt lingered among the crowd. People could sense the seriousness in his tone, but they couldn't ignore the potential danger. Some whispered fears of flooding, crop damage, and loss of wildlife. Others argued that Eli's experience and knowledge of the land might prevent any disaster. The town was divided, unsure whether to admire his courage or fear his stubbornness. By early afternoon, Eli began preparing the machinery needed for his plan. Trucks and equipment were lined up neatly on the edge of the ranch, ready to move at a moment's notice. The hum of engines and the clatter of tools signaled the start of action. People gathered, watching from a safe distance, their curiosity mixing with apprehension. Some carried cameras, wanting to record the moment, while others simply stood in silence, wondering if the town's history was about to change. Mrs. Carter, still clutching her basket of bread, approached Eli once more. "Eli," she said softly, "I just want you to remember why we're worried. This isn't just about your land. We all depend on the river. Please, think about it one more time." Eli looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of hesitation, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of his decision. But then he straightened, the quiet determination settling over him. "I understand, Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "but I can't turn back now. I have to do this. I promise it will be okay." The crowd began to murmur nervously. Some nodded reluctantly, trusting Eli's experience. Others shook their heads, frustrated that no one could change his mind. Children whispered among themselves, sensing both excitement and fear. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of anticipation, worry, and awe. As the sun climbed higher, the first preparations for the plan were underway. Workers moved equipment carefully, digging and marking areas along the riverbank. Eli supervised every step, his attention to detail meticulous. He gave clear instructions, corrected mistakes immediately, and encouraged the workers with calm, steady words. There was no chaos, no panic, only the quiet, controlled energy of a man determined to follow through with his vision. Despite the calm, the town's concern never waned. Families walked along the road, pointing out potential risks. Farmers whispered warnings about the water levels and soil stability. Children clung to parents, wide-eyed at the sight of the machines and the growing tension. Everyone was waiting, knowing that the moment of action, when Eli finally put his plan into motion, would arrive soon. By late afternoon, a sense of urgency had settled over Cedar Creek. The day's work had brought the preparations to the brink of execution. Eli walked along the riverbank, checking every detail once more. The machines were ready, the workers prepared, and the town was watching. Every step he took, every decision he made, carried the weight of the community's hopes and fears. The neighbors who had tried to persuade him earlier gathered at the edge of the ranch, watching silently. They had done everything they could to warn him, to make him reconsider. Now all they could do was observe, hoping that Eli's judgment would be as sound as he claimed. Even Mrs. Carter, who had pleaded with him most passionately, stood quietly, her basket now empty, her eyes fixed on the rancher who had captured the town's attention. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, the stage was set. The town of Cedar Creek was on edge, and Eli Thompson, calm and resolute, was ready to take the next step. What he would do and how it would affect the community remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the quiet, predictable life of Cedar Creek was about to change forever. The day had grown hot and still, with the sun blazing high over Cedar Creek. The town seemed to hold its collective breath, as though it sensed that something important, and perhaps dangerous, was about to happen. The usual sounds of the countryside, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirping of birds, and the rustle of leaves, felt louder than normal, echoing through the nervous minds of the townspeople. Everyone who could see the Thompson Ranch watched silently from a distance, aware that they might witness a moment that would change the town forever. Eli Thompson stood at the edge of the river, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp soil. He had spent the past weeks preparing for this moment, walking the riverbank at dawn and dusk, studying the water's flow and making careful plans for the machinery he had rented. Now, as he gazed at the winding river, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He knew that the town had concerns, and he understood why. But he also knew that hesitation now could ruin everything. The machines, lined up neatly along the bank, roared to life with a rumble that echoed across the fields. Excavators, trucks, and tractors moved with precision, guided by workers who had been carefully instructed by Eli himself. There was no chaos, only deliberate, steady action. Every scoop of earth, every adjustment of the machinery was executed with care. The sound of metal against soil and the hiss of hydraulics filled the air, creating a tense rhythm that matched the anxious beating of the townspeople's hearts. From their vantage points, the townspeople watched in silence. Some whispered to one another, expressing hope that Eli had truly calculated every risk. Others shook their heads, convinced disaster was inevitable. Children perched on fences and leaned against their parents, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Even the sheriff remained nearby, standing a safe distance away, observing carefully but refusing to intervene unless something went wrong. Eli gave precise instructions to his workers. "Keep the machine steady," he said in a calm, commanding voice. "Check the water flow here and here. We don't want any mistakes. One misstep, and it could cause more problems than we can fix." His voice carried authority, and the workers moved quickly but carefully, following every word. As the machines began shifting the river slightly, moving soil to reshape the bank, the water responded slowly. A soft ripple moved downstream, and small splashes rose where the earth met the current. Eli's eyes followed every movement. He adjusted the position of a machine, signaling for it to move a little higher, then stepped back to observe the effect. It was delicate work, and he treated it as though he were performing surgery. Every decision mattered. Every step could determine the outcome. The townspeople murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of awe and fear. "Look at how careful he is," one man whispered. "I can't believe he's doing it alone." Another woman shook her head, worry etched across her face. "Even if he's careful, what if something goes wrong downstream? Our homes could be flooded." The uncertainty hung over the crowd like a heavy cloud, creating a tension that was almost tangible. For hours, Eli continued his work, moving slowly but steadily. He didn't speak unnecessarily, focusing entirely on the task at hand. He checked the water's flow, measured the soil's stability, and adjusted the machinery as needed. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his hands, rough from years of labor, were caked with dirt. Yet despite the physical strain, there was a calm determination in his eyes. This was the moment he had been preparing for, and he refused to let fear or doubt sway him. Meanwhile, the town's curiosity began to grow into a mixture of concern and frustration. Some of the neighbors who had pleaded with him earlier now walked closer, hoping to see exactly what he was doing. Others returned to their chores, keeping a cautious eye on the river. Families gathered in small groups along the road, whispering advice and warnings to one another. Even though no one could stop Eli, they all hoped that he would succeed without causing harm. By mid-afternoon, the riverbank had been altered significantly. The machines moved large amounts of soil, creating new channels for the water to flow. Small pools formed in the uneven areas, reflecting the sun's bright light. The workers wiped sweat from their brows, following Eli's instructions carefully. He inspected every change, stepping back frequently to ensure the water flowed as he intended. It was a tense balance. Too much soil in one area could flood the nearby fields, while too little might cause the river to erode the bank. Eli paused for a moment, wiping dirt from his face and studying the river. He could see the subtle shifts in the water's current, the way it adapted to the new path. His heart raced slightly, but he remained composed. He had anticipated this moment, the first time the river would respond to his intervention. It was a test of his planning, patience, and experience. He breathed deeply, steadying himself for the next steps. The townspeople's tension grew as they noticed the changes. Some were impressed by Eli's precision and skill. "He really knows what he's doing," one farmer admitted quietly. But the fear was still strong. "It only takes one small mistake," a woman whispered, "and everything could be ruined." Even the sheriff standing nearby watched intently, aware that a single error could have serious consequences for the community. As the afternoon wore on, the workers began reinforcing the banks and smoothing the soil. They created small channels to guide the water and prevent it from spilling over into the farmland. Eli supervised every step, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. His voice was calm but firm, directing the team with authority. Occasionally, he would pause to adjust a machine or reposition a mound of earth, always focused on the river's behavior. Despite the careful work, small problems began to appear. A section of soil that had seemed stable started to shift under the pressure of the water. Eli noticed immediately, signaling for the workers to reinforce it with sandbags. The townspeople gasped quietly, their anxiety spiking. They had hoped that everything would go smoothly, but seeing even a minor issue reminded them of the potential dangers. Eli didn't panic. He moved quickly, instructing the workers on how to stabilize the section and prevent any further movement. He climbed carefully onto the embankment, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil, and adjusted the sandbags with his own hands. Every movement was deliberate, every decision precise. The townspeople watched in silence, holding their breath as they saw the rancher take control of the situation. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The temperature cooled slightly, but the tension remained. The river had been reshaped significantly, and small pools and channels reflected the fading sunlight. Eli moved along the riverbank, checking every detail, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of trouble. He spoke quietly to the workers, offering guidance and reassurance. The townspeople could see the changes, and their feelings were mixed. Some felt a growing admiration for Eli's skill and dedication. Others felt a deep concern, fearing what might happen once the river fully adjusted to its new path. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide with curiosity, while adults whispered warnings and prayers under their breath. It was a strange mixture of awe, fear, and hope, all centered on the rancher who had captured the town's attention. By early evening, Eli stepped back and surveyed his work. The river flowed through its new channels, the soil reinforced, and the machinery quiet. Sweat and dirt coated his face and clothes, but there was a calm satisfaction in his expression. He had completed the first phase of his plan, and so far everything was holding as expected. The townspeople, still gathered along the road, let out quiet sighs of relief. The river hadn't overflowed, and no immediate harm had come to the farmland. Some nodded in cautious approval, while others remained tense, aware that the situation was far from over. Even the sheriff allowed himself a small, approving nod, recognizing Eli's skill and determination. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, a sense of both accomplishment and uncertainty settled over the ranch and the town. Eli knew that the next steps would be just as challenging, if not more so, but for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of rest, standing at the riverbank and watching the water move through its new path. The town, meanwhile, returned to their homes, carrying a mixture of curiosity, fear, and cautious optimism. The quiet of the evening was a stark contrast to the tension of the day. The distant sound of machinery had faded, leaving only the gentle flow of the river and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The town of Cedar Creek had witnessed the first stage of Eli Thompson's bold plan, and while no one could predict the final outcome, one thing was clear: the rancher's determination had already left its mark. And for better or worse, the community would never see the land and the river the same way again. The morning after Eli's first day of work, the town of Cedar Creek awoke with a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and frustration. News of the changes to the river had spread quickly, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some people were impressed by Eli's skill and dedication, but most were outraged. The thought that the rancher had acted alone, without truly considering the community, sparked heated conversations everywhere, from the diner to the grocery store, from the schoolyard to the town hall. Mrs. Carter, the baker, was one of the first to voice her anger publicly. She set out freshly baked bread at her shop, but her hands shook slightly as she served the townspeople. "I cannot believe he went ahead with this," she muttered to a neighbor, shaking her head. "We told him not to, but he ignored us. Our homes, our farms, everything depends on that river." People nodded in agreement, their faces lined with worry. The Johnsons, whose farm bordered Eli's ranch, were even more frustrated. They had spent the night worrying about potential flooding and damage to their crops. Mr. Johnson strode over to the edge of his property, looking toward the river with a mix of concern and disbelief. "It's like he doesn't care about anyone but himself," he said to his wife. "The river isn't just his property. He's put all of us at risk." The town sheriff, who had tried to remain neutral, found himself pulled into the middle of the growing tension. By mid-morning, he was at the town hall, listening to complaints from residents who were demanding action. People wanted him to intervene, to stop Eli before any more damage could be done. But the sheriff understood that Eli had acted within his legal rights on his own property. It was a delicate balance. He had to maintain order without escalating the conflict further. Meanwhile, Eli was already back on the ranch, unaware of the full scale of the town's outrage. He moved along the riverbank, checking the progress of the changes he had made the previous day. The water flowed through the new channel smoothly, and the soil seemed stable. He had anticipated the town's concerns, and his calculations had been precise. So far, everything was going according to plan. Eli's calm and methodical approach only fueled the frustration of the townspeople. From their view along the main road, they could see the machines still working, guided by Eli's steady hand. Some townspeople shook their heads in disbelief. "How can he be so calm?" one woman whispered. "Doesn't he realize the damage he's done?" Others argued that Eli was simply skilled and that the river's changes might actually benefit the land in the long run, but most of the townspeople were too worried to consider that possibility. By mid-afternoon, the consequences of Eli's actions began to show, at least in small ways. The reshaped river had caused minor flooding in low-lying areas, just enough to worry the farmers who relied on precise irrigation for their crops. Livestock that had grazed near the river were moved to higher ground, creating a temporary disruption in daily routines. While there was no immediate disaster, the subtle changes were enough to make the town realize that Eli's plan was more serious than they had imagined. The town's outrage reached its peak when a local journalist arrived to cover the story. Cameras rolled, microphones were set up, and the reporter began asking questions that reflected the concerns of the community. "Mr. Thompson," the journalist asked, "did you consider the potential harm to the town before altering the river? Some residents fear flooding and damage to their property." Eli responded calmly, with the same quiet confidence he had displayed from the start. "I have considered every possible consequence," he said. "I have studied the land and the water. This plan is designed to protect my ranch and, in the long term, benefit the community as well." The interview only seemed to heighten the tension. People who had once admired Eli's independence now saw him as reckless, arrogant, or both. The town was divided. Some believed he was right, trusting his knowledge of the land and his careful execution. Others were furious, feeling that he had acted without enough regard for the community. Heated debates broke out in the diner, the school, and even at the church. The air in Cedar Creek seemed charged, full of worry, anger, and disbelief. By evening, the town had organized a meeting at the community center. Nearly every adult in Cedar Creek attended, eager to express their concerns and demand answers. The room buzzed with voices, some calm, some shaking with anger. Chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors found their seats, and the sheriff stood at the front, attempting to maintain order. The meeting began with the mayor outlining the situation, summarizing Eli's actions and the potential impact on the town. When the floor was open for discussion, voices rose in unison. "He can't just do whatever he wants," one man shouted. "Our land, our homes, our families are all connected to that river." Another woman added, "We tried to warn him. We begged him not to do this." People nodded and murmured in agreement, their frustration growing with each passing minute. The room felt alive with tension, a mixture of fear, anger, and a desperate need for accountability. Eli, despite being at his ranch, had sent a representative to explain his side of the story. His assistant, a young man who had worked with him for years, stood at the front of the room detailing the steps Eli had taken and emphasizing the careful planning involved. "He has considered the risks," the assistant said. "The river's flow has been monitored and safety measures are in place. He believes this plan will ultimately protect the land and community, not harm it." Some residents softened slightly, appreciating the thought and preparation Eli had put into his actions. But the overall mood remained tense. Many people felt that, regardless of the precautions, Eli had acted independently, ignoring the town's repeated warnings. "It's not just the plan," one farmer said. "It's the attitude. He didn't even try to listen. He just did it anyway." Outside, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, tension in the town began to spill over into action. Groups of neighbors visited the riverbank to inspect the changes themselves. Some took photographs, hoping to document any issues that might arise. Others talked quietly, planning ways to prevent potential problems or to restore the river to its original path if necessary. The sense of community action was strong, fueled by a mix of anger, concern, and a desire to protect what belonged to everyone. Eli, observing from the ranch, noticed some of the townspeople gathering along the river. He didn't confront them. Instead, he continued his careful monitoring, adjusting soil and water flow where needed. His calm approach, once again, only made the townspeople more frustrated. They wanted urgency, confrontation, and accountability, but Eli remained steady, precise, and unyielding. By nightfall, the riverbank was quiet. The machinery was silent, and the workers had gone home. Yet the tension in Cedar Creek remained high. Families returned to their homes, discussing the events of the day with worry in their voices. Farmers inspected their fields for any signs of trouble, checking the flow of water and the condition of their soil. Even the children, who had spent the day watching the machines in the river, sensed that something significant had occurred, something that would affect the town for years to come. As the town settled into an uneasy quiet, the consequences of Eli's actions became clear. While no immediate disaster had occurred, the subtle disruptions to the river and the land had created worry, mistrust, and division among the townspeople. Some began to question whether Eli's confidence was enough to prevent future problems. Others wondered if he truly understood the broader impact of his decisions. And while Eli himself felt a sense of quiet accomplishment, he also recognized that he had stirred strong emotions in the community, a challenge he would need to face in the days to come. The night air was cool and still, carrying with it the faint scent of hay, dirt, and the flowing river. Stars began to appear in the sky, twinkling above the town and the ranch. The quiet was almost surreal after a day filled with tension, action, and emotion. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the town's concern continued to simmer. People slept restlessly, worried about what might happen next. The river, now reshaped and altered, reflected the moonlight in gentle ripples, a silent reminder of Eli Thompson's bold, controversial choices. Cedar Creek had witnessed the first real consequences of the rancher's actions. Outrage and concern had spread through the town like wildfire, testing relationships, trust, and patience. And while Eli believed he had done the right thing, the community was left to grapple with the immediate effects of his plan and to wonder what the future might hold. The story of that day would linger in Cedar Creek for weeks, months, and even years. It became a lesson in stubbornness, careful planning, and the tension between individual decisions and community welfare. And though some continued to support Eli, many others remained skeptical, watching and waiting to see how the river and the town itself would adjust to the changes he had made.